Welcome back to Revenge Red. My name is Diana Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and until the day my father called me, I thought buying my first house would finally be the moment my life stopped feeling borrowed. I had just closed on a narrow brick row home in Philadelphia after 12 years of overtime, skipped vacations, and saying no to almost everything that wasn't survival. I wasn't even fully moved in yet. Half my boxes were still taped shut, my dishes were stacked on the floor, and I was sleeping on an air mattress because I wanted to save up before buying real furniture. That morning, I was standing in the kitchen measuring a wall for bookshelves when my phone lit up. My father didn't say hello. He said, "You need to come get your things. Your sister needs the house more than you do." I laughed at first because the sentence was so outrageous it didn't sound real. Then my mother got on speaker and said, "Calm as rain. This is your sister's home now, Diana. Be mature about it." In the background, I heard children running, cabinet doors opening, and then my sister's voice, light and smug and completely at home in a place she had never paid for. "You're not welcome here, so don't make this ugly." That was the moment my stomach dropped so hard I had to grab the counter. They weren't asking. They had already moved in. My father had used the emergency key I'd given him while I was at work, and my entire future had been handed over like a family favor. 2 days later, they threw a housewarming party in my home and told people I had never helped anyone. They thought they had erased me. What they forgot, what none of them bothered to check, was whose name was on the deed. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. For 3 straight days, I didn't cry. I know that sounds strange, but I was too stunned to cry. I went to work at the museum, checked inventory on 17th century maps, signed transfer forms for a loan shipment from New York, answered emails, and smiled at donors, while my brain kept replaying that sentence, "This is your sister's home, now." My job as a museum registrar is basically documentation, chain of custody, and proof. I track what belongs to whom, where it came from, where it goes, and what happens if someone touches something they had no right to touch. I handled priceless objects with more legal protection than my own family thought I deserved. On the 4th night, I drove past the house after sunset. My porch light was on. Not my old apartment's porch light. My porch light. I saw a stroller by the front step, little sneakers lined up by the doorway, and a wreath on the door I had not bought. A laugh floated through the screen window, and I recognized it immediately. Vanessa, my golden sister. The one who always landed softly, no matter whose back she stepped on. That same night, I opened a storage bin in my apartment and found a hard drive full of digitized family videos I'd been meaning to organize. I wasn't looking for childhood pain, I was looking for proof that I wasn't crazy. I clicked one file, then another, then another. At 8 years old, I was holding a spelling bee trophy while my mother adjusted Vanessa's pageant sash and told the camera to zoom in on the pretty one. At 14, I was in the background of a Christmas video wrapping presents, while my father filmed Vanessa opening a used car they'd sacrificed everything to buy. At 22, during my college graduation dinner, my mother lifted her glass and somehow turned the toast into a speech about Vanessa finding herself. It wasn't one dramatic betrayal, it was 100 little edits, repeated until I became the family workhorse and she became the family story. That was when I finally said their names out loud to the empty room like I was reading a charge sheet. Robert Brooks, Elaine Brooks, Vanessa Brooks. And once I said them like that, something inside me cooled off. I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like a records manager. I pulled up the settlement statement from my closing. Sole owner, Diana Brooks. I checked the mortgage. Sole borrower, Diana Brooks. Home insurance, utilities, title, tax registration, all mine. Then I checked the doorbell camera app I had installed but barely used. The footage was still there. My father unlocking the door. My mother carrying in garment bags. Vanessa directing movers while holding a latte. Her husband, Grant, bringing in framed photos. One of my boxes placed on the sidewalk like trash. They hadn't just crossed a boundary. They had documented their own trespass for me in high definition. The next slap came on social media. Vanessa had posted a smiling family photo in my living room with the caption, "Finally in our forever home. Grateful for the people who actually show up." My mother commented with heart emojis. My father wrote, "Proud of you, kiddo." Dozens of strangers congratulated them. One woman wrote, "So happy your family helped you get back on your feet." Another wrote, "Love seeing good people rewarded." I stared at that screen so long my eyes started watering, not because it hurt, but because I understood the strategy. They weren't just taking my house. They were writing me out in public before I could speak. Then the invitation arrived. Not to me, of course. A coworker of my mother's had shared Vanessa's open house post, and there it was. "Come celebrate our new beginning this Saturday." Our new beginning. In my house. That was the exact moment the fog lifted. I called a property attorney named Caleb Mercer the next morning, and before I even finished explaining, he said, "Do not warn them yet. Gather every document, save every post, download every video. Let them keep talking." So I did. I made folders, screenshots, timelines, copies of the deed, utility confirmations, insurance documents, ring footage, text messages, even a photo of the lockbox code I had once trusted my father with. They thought I was the invisible daughter again. But invisibility can be useful when the people underestimating you are too arrogant to hide the evidence. By the end of that week, I had a legal file thick enough to make my hands ache. By the end of the next, I was ready to walk into my own house and let them perform their lies one last time. The housewarming party was on a Saturday at 4. I arrived at 4:20, because timing matters when people are busy admiring themselves. Cars lined both sides of the block. I recognized neighbors I hadn't met yet, church friends of my mother's, two of my father's golfing buddies, and at least a dozen strangers holding paper plates and red plastic cups in a home I still hadn't gotten to live in. Through the open front window, I could hear Vanessa telling someone the place had needed a woman's touch, which was bold considering she'd been in it for less than 2 weeks and had already painted over the hallway trim I'd spent a month restoring. I stood on the sidewalk for maybe 10 seconds, just breathing. Not because I was scared, because anger, if you don't shape it properly, makes you sloppy. And I had not come there to be messy. I had come there to be unforgettable. Inside, the smell hit me first. Grilled meat, artificial vanilla candles, and some overpowering floral room spray Vanessa always used when she wanted things to feel expensive. My mother saw me first and nearly dropped her drink. My father stiffened. Vanessa turned slowly, one hand still resting on the granite edge of my kitchen island, and smiled like I was a nuisance she'd expected eventually. "Well," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Look who decided to stop by after all." Conversation stumbled and thinned out. I could feel people listening without looking. Vanessa kept going. "You know, it's funny. She never lifted a finger while we were struggling, but now suddenly she wants attention." A few nervous chuckles. My mother added, "Diana, this really isn't the time." My father took the crueler route. "Don't start something in front of guests." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Actually," I said, "this is exactly the right time." Then I reached into my bag and laid 3 things on the dining table in front of everyone: a copy of the deed, a printed still shot from my doorbell camera of my father entering with the emergency key, and a notice from Caleb's office addressed to all 4 occupants. The room got quiet in a way I can only describe as surgical. Vanessa stared at the paperwork, then laughed too fast. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Dad said you were fine with us staying here." My father snapped. "We're family." She wasn't using it yet. That was when I looked around at all those guests and said, clearly enough for the back of the room to hear, "Since everyone is here celebrating, let me save you from being used as witnesses to a lie. I am the sole legal owner of this property. No one in this house has a lease, permission, or any ownership interest." They entered using a key I gave for emergencies and moved in while I was at work. My mother tried to grab the papers. I moved them away. Vanessa's smile cracked. "You are seriously doing this right now?" she hissed. "In front of everybody?" I looked her dead in the eye. "You already did it in front of everybody. Online. In my house." Then Caleb, who had told me he'd stay nearby if I wanted a witness, stepped through the front door after I texted him a single word. "Now." He introduced himself, handed over the formal demand for immediate surrender of the property, and explained, in the tone of a man who had repeated the law to entitled people many times before, that any further occupancy, property damage, or interference with access would increase their liability. One of my father's friends quietly set down his plate and left, then another, and another. You could practically hear the party unraveling. Vanessa, of course, went for performance. "This is cruel," she said, tears arriving on schedule. "You know we needed help." Her husband, Grant, who had been mostly silent until then, asked the question that changed the whole room. "Wait, you told me your parents co-own this place." Vanessa froze. My father started talking over him. My mother began crying. Grant looked at the deed, then at me, then back at his wife, like a man suddenly realizing his marriage had been built on selective facts. "Did you lie to me?" he asked. Vanessa snapped. "I did what I had to do for our kids." That line might have worked on my parents. It did not work on me. "No," I said. "You did what was easiest because everyone in this family trained you to believe my work, my money, and my future were community property. I would love to tell you that was the moment they surrendered. It wasn't. People like that rarely stop at shame. They pivot to blame. My father called me selfish. My mother said I was humiliating them." Vanessa told the remaining guests I had always hated her, but the magic was gone. The lie had been punctured, and once air starts leaking out of a family myth, everyone hears the hiss. Before I left, I walked through each room slowly because I wanted them to feel what I felt, that none of this was theirs. In the back bedroom, one of my labeled moving boxes had been opened and rifled through. In the bathroom, my towels were hanging by the sink like borrowed skin. In the living room, Vanessa had covered the mantel with family photos that didn't include me. I took one of those frames down, set it face first on the table, and said, "You have been living inside the consequences of underestimating me. You just don't know the full bill yet." Then I left. The next month was war by paperwork, and I was better built for it than they were. Vanessa assumed I would get emotional and back down. My parents assumed I would cave for the sake of family peace. What they failed to understand was that I had spent my adult life learning how to preserve records so that truth could outlast ego. I went back through every account connected to the house: utility spikes, unauthorized mailing address changes, delivery receipts, neighbors' messages, a contractor invoice for an illegal wall removal Vanessa had bragged about on Instagram, a tax notice tied to a small online boutique she had registered using my address without permission. That one made Caleb actually smile. "This," he said, tapping the page, "is where selfish becomes stupid." Around that time, my best friend Tessa Reed became the only person who could get me to eat a full meal. Tessa was an exhibition designer at the museum, smart, funny, and incapable of pretending a bad situation was fine. She had known me long enough to understand that when I go quiet, I'm usually building something. One night, As we sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by bankers' boxes and legal tabs, she said, "You know what makes this worse? It isn't just that they took the house, it's that they were sure you would absorb it." She was right. The house was the event. The assumption behind it was the real wound. My role had always been to produce, rescue, organize, forgive, and then disappear so Vanessa could sparkle in the center of the frame. So I made a decision that had nothing and everything to do with revenge. I stopped waiting for the museum to define my future. For years, I had quietly built expertise in provenance research, restoration logistics, and collection planning. Tessa pushed me to package that knowledge into private consulting for small galleries and historical societies that couldn't afford full-time registrars. "You already know how to prove what belongs to who," she said. "Apparently, that's your superpower." Within 6 weeks, I had 2 side clients, then 3. I was working longer hours than ever, but for the first time, the exhaustion felt directional. Every invoice I sent, every contract I signed, every client who introduced me as the one who saves a project from chaos, stitched me back together. Meanwhile, chaos was blooming nicely at my house. Because yes, it was still my house, no matter who was misusing it. My father ignored the demand letter. Vanessa posted passive-aggressive quotes about betrayal and toxic relatives. My mother called twice, left teary voicemails, and somehow never apologized. Grant, though, had changed. He called Caleb's office to request copies of the public record documents. That told me everything. He was checking whether he had been deceived, and he had. Then a neighbor emailed me after noticing a dumpster out front. Vanessa had started updating the place to make it feel more like hers. New backsplash, removed shelving, painted brick. One photo showed workers hauling out the original built-ins from the study, the ones that had been one of the reasons I bought the house in the first place. I felt so angry my hands shook. Then I did something different. I documented the damage, assigned estimates, and added another category to the complaint. Destruction is easier to punish when you itemize it. The legal action moved faster once we filed for wrongful occupancy, property damage, unauthorized business use of the address, and reimbursement for carrying costs. Caleb also sent a preservation notice warning them not to delete social posts, texts, or financial records related to the property. That spooked my father enough to call me directly. His voice had none of its old authority left. "This has gone too far," he said. "You're making strangers think we're criminals." I remember answering without any heat at all. "No, Dad, your behavior is doing that. I'm just making it visible." He hung up. 2 days later, Vanessa made the mistake that turned a strong case into a devastating one. She sold my original foyer mirror, an antique I had inherited from my grandmother, through an online marketplace. The buyer, bless him, turned out to be a local history teacher who recognized me from the museum website and emailed to ask if I was downsizing. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw the photo. Caleb's response was immediate: conversion claim, amended complaint, emergency motion. If you've never watched a family narrative collapse under documentation, it's less dramatic than people imagine. It doesn't happen in one explosion. It happens in layers. First, they lose confidence, then they lose consistency. Then they start contradicting each other. My mother told one story, my father another, Vanessa a third. Grant stopped appearing in the background of her posts. Church friends stopped commenting. And by the time fall arrived, I had built something stronger than anger. I had leverage. The funny thing about being the daughter everyone overlooks is that you learn how to survive without applause. The dangerous thing is that when you finally stop begging to be seen, people often realize too late that you were the structural beam holding their illusions up. By October, my consulting work had grown enough that the museum invited me to curate a small public program on restoration ethics and the hidden labor behind preserving history. Tessa helped me turn it into something bigger. A polished evening event with donors, local press, and a showcase of recovered objects paired with stories about ownership, care, and misattribution. The theme wasn't subtle, and I didn't care. For once, I wanted a room built around truth. We called the event What Survives. The title fit more than the exhibit. It fit me. The night of the opening, I wore a navy dress, pinned my hair back, and stood under gallery lights feeling steadier than I had in months. The room was full by 6:30. Reporters from 2 local arts outlets were there. So were board members, independent curators, and several new consulting contacts. People asked smart questions. They listened. They took notes. They said my work gave them a new respect for the invisible systems that protect what matters. I wish I could explain what that felt like after a lifetime of being treated like support staff in my own family. Then Tessa, who had been near the entrance managing the flow, went very still. I followed her gaze and saw the last people I wanted in that room: Elaine, Vanessa, and Grant. Grant looked exhausted. Elaine looked nervous. Vanessa looked like she had dressed for battle. She crossed the gallery floor with that same bright, brittle confidence she used when she was about to do something reckless. "Wow," she said, looking around as if she were granting approval. "This is cute. I didn't realize family drama could turn into a brand." A few guests pretended not to hear. Others absolutely heard. I could feel the atmosphere shift, waiting. Tessa moved closer, but I gave her a tiny shake of the head. Let her talk, I thought. Liars are most useful when they feel theatrical. Vanessa took another step and raised her voice. "You know, it's funny she acts so principled now. Half her inspiration came from living in our house and watching me rebuild a home for my children. There it was. Not enough that she had trespassed, lied, and damaged my property. She had to colonize the narrative, too." I smiled. Not warmly, but with recognition. "Our house?" I said into the microphone I had been using for remarks. Conversations around the room stilled. "That's interesting phrasing, Vanessa." Then I nodded to Tessa, who handed me a folder. No dramatic slideshow this time. I didn't need spectacle. I needed precision. "Since you chose a public setting," I continued, "let's be exact. The property is legally mine. You were served notice. You used my address for your business without consent. You sold an inherited item that did not belong to you. And last week, your attorney requested a settlement discussion after seeing the amended damages." A visible ripple moved through the room. Grant closed his eyes. Elaine whispered, "Diana, please." Vanessa tried outrage. "You are obsessed with humiliating me?" she snapped. "You've always been jealous." That line might once have landed because it was the family default, but timing is everything, and what she said next finished her. "You never cared about that house until I made it look like something." A reporter actually lowered her pen and stared. Tessa gave me the smallest look that said, "She did not just say that out loud." I answered calmly, "I restored that house before you ever stepped inside it. I saved for it. I bought it. I insured it. I paid every tax bill on it. You decorated over my work and called it destiny." Then Grant spoke, not to me, but to the room, voice flat with humiliation. "She told me her parents owned it jointly and Diana had agreed. None of that was true. If you've ever heard a lie die in public, that was the sound." Vanessa burst into tears again, but this time nobody rushed to comfort her. Elaine reached for her. Vanessa yanked away. Grant stepped back altogether. A museum trustee quietly asked security to stand nearby, though nothing physical happened. The real damage was social, and everybody knew it. The story no longer belonged to the golden daughter with the wounded smile. It belonged to the documents, the witnesses, the contradictions, and the man she had misled into moving his children into a lawsuit. She fled first. Elaine followed. Grant remained long enough to say very softly, "I'm sorry," before walking out a different door. Afterward, the event went on, and that was perhaps the most satisfying part. Not the exposure itself, but the fact that their chaos no longer dictated the whole room. People asked if I was okay. I said yes, because for the first time it was true. A donor from a preservation foundation approached me near closing and said, "You have a rare gift for making facts impossible to ignore." She offered to introduce me to 2 institutions looking for outside consultants. On the ride home, Tessa laughed so hard she had to pull over. "She tried to hijack a professional event," she said, wiping her eyes, "and instead, she gave your career a testimonial." But beneath the humor was something harder and cleaner. Vanessa had always relied on intimacy to keep me quiet. Once the truth moved into public space, where roles mattered less than records, she had nothing left but performance. And performance, without credibility, is just noise in expensive shoes. 3 weeks after the exhibit, Caleb called with the update I'd been waiting for. The court had granted possession and set the timeline for enforcement if the property wasn't vacated voluntarily. They also ordered preservation of remaining property contents, which meant no more sneaky sales, no more misplaced heirlooms, no more pretending damage had been there before. Vanessa's side wanted settlement. My father wanted a family conversation. My mother wanted prayer. I wanted keys, repairs, reimbursement, and distance. Grant, I later learned, had moved into a short-term rental with the kids while he decided what to do next. He was done taking Vanessa's version of events on faith. The golden child, it turned out, shined brightest only when everyone else supplied the electricity. Then came the text from Vanessa. "Can we please just meet? No lawyers, no drama, just family." I stared at it for a long time, not because I was tempted, but because the audacity fascinated me. No lawyers? After trespassing, fraud-adjacent address misuse, property destruction, online defamation, and the sale of my grandmother's mirror? That was like asking a surgeon to put the scalpel away halfway through a life-saving procedure because the incision felt personal. I didn't answer. An hour later, my father called. "Your mother is falling apart," he said. "This has to stop." I said, "It stops when you stop treating my life like an extension of Vanessa's wants." He exhaled hard. Then, for the first time, fear slipped into his voice. "You don't understand how bad this is getting." I almost laughed. "I understand perfectly," I said. "That's why it's finally working." Still, I agreed to one meeting, but on my terms. Not at their church, not at the house, not at some restaurant where they could perform normalcy. I told Caleb I wanted every relevant file ready, every damage estimate organized, every reimbursement category clear. Then I invited them to my apartment, the cramped one they had once looked down on, the one I had quietly turned into command central. Tessa helped me set the place with almost comic precision. Legal binders on the dining table, printed stills in labeled folders, quotes from contractors, copy of the possession order, spreadsheet of carrying costs, storage, repairs, and replacement values. And yes, Caleb waited in the bedroom until I texted him to come out. I had learned something essential through all this. Surprise is not cruelty when used to stop ongoing theft. Surprise is containment. They arrived on a gray Sunday afternoon. Robert first, looking 10 years older. Elaine behind him, clutching tissues. Vanessa last, sunglasses on indoors, which told me everything about her current state. She took them off, and I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked terrible, but because she looked ordinary. Stripped of the family glow, stripped of the assumption that someone else would absorb the impact. She was just a woman who had made one selfish decision too many and finally reached a wall that would not move. No one hugged me. Good. We sat. The room felt smaller than ever. I let the silence settle until it became uncomfortable enough to be honest. My father started with the usual language: misunderstandings, emotions, family strain. Nobody meant harm. I let him talk until he said, "We all made mistakes." Then I pushed a binder toward him and said, "No, you made choices." I walked them through every one: unauthorized entry, occupancy without permission, damage from unapproved renovations, business registration using my address, sale of my property, public false statements, legal fees, delays in moving, increased insurance risk, storage costs, contractor quotes, replacement values. Each page was a sentence they had thought would never be written. Elaine started crying halfway through. Vanessa interrupted twice, both times to say I was exaggerating, and both times I handed over another document. There is a specific kind of silence that falls when people realize emotion will not erase paper. It's almost holy. Then I called Caleb in. My mother actually gasped. Vanessa muttered, "Unbelievable." Caleb sat, opened his own folder, and explained the options in plain English. Vacate by the deadline, surrender keys, allow inspection, pay agreed damages over time, and cooperate, or face enforcement, expanded civil exposure, and possible referral of specific conduct for further review, depending on what discovery uncovered. My father went pale at the word discovery. Good. Discovery is where family myths go to die under oath. Vanessa tried one last manipulation. She looked at me with wet eyes and said, "You would really do this to your own sister?" For a second, the child in me, the one trained to feel guilty for existing, stirred. Then the adult answered, "No, Vanessa, I'm doing this because you did this to your own sister and expected no consequences." That was the turning point. Not because they apologized. They didn't. Not really. They unraveled. Elaine admitted she had told relatives the house was basically Vanessa's now, because she assumed I would never challenge it. Robert admitted he had used the emergency key because someone had to make a decision. Vanessa admitted she had changed the business mailing address because her lease problems were hurting sales, and my neighborhood looked more stable online. Every confession made them smaller. Every answer made me calmer. By the time they left, no one was pretending we were there to heal. We were there to close a trap. They signed nothing that day, but they had seen the full landscape. And when people finally understand the size of the cliff they are standing near, some of them step back. Some jump anyway. Vanessa, as it turned out, still had one bad choice left in her. The final collapse happened faster than even Caleb predicted. 2 days after the meeting, Grant filed for separation. I know some viewers love revenge stories where the spouse instantly becomes a hero, but that wasn't this. He was not my ally. He was a man who discovered he had moved his children into a legal disaster because his wife and in-laws had lied, and he chose self-preservation. Still, the effect on Vanessa was catastrophic. Without Grant's income and with her business already wobbling from tax issues tied to the address misuse, she could no longer pretend this was just a sibling fight. It was a measurable life failure. My father called 3 times in one day, and when I finally answered, he sounded nothing like the man who had once ordered me to collect my things. "Please," he said, "your mother and I can't cover this." That was when I learned the part they had hidden even from me. In the rush to prop up Vanessa's image, they had drained most of their savings helping with her debts and school tuition for the kids, assuming my house would give her time to recover. They had gambled with everything because they believed I was the safe child, the one who would quietly survive being sacrificed. The sheriff's enforcement date was set for 30 days after the possession order. They were out in 22. Not out gracefully, of course. Vanessa left half-packed resentment in every room. Cheap fixtures where better ones had been removed. Nail holes, broken trim, missing hardware. a cracked tile near the back entry. But she left. The first time I walked back inside after the lock change, I stood in the foyer and just listened. No footsteps that weren't mine. No borrowed laughter. No lie trying to settle into the walls. It smelled like dust, paint, and a very expensive lesson. Caleb's inspector documented everything. We recovered my grandmother's mirror from the buyer, who was kind enough to return it after hearing the story. The built-ins in the study had to be reconstructed. The mantel had gouges from nails Vanessa's decorator had hammered in. The total damages were ugly enough that my parents ended up selling a small lake cabin they'd spent years bragging about to cover part of the settlement. That detail, I'll admit, gave me a very specific kind of peace. As for the public fallout, it didn't come from me ranting online. It came from silence, facts, and the natural spread of consequences. Church friends learned pieces, neighbors learned more, Grant's family learned the rest. Vanessa's boutique lost credibility after customer service issues exposed how unstable things were behind the scenes. My mother stopped posting inspirational quotes about family unity. My father stopped giving advice to anyone, and when one cousin called to say she hoped I wasn't being too hard on them, I answered with the most freeing sentence of my life: "You are welcome to house them in your name." She changed the subject immediately. Funny how fast sympathy dries up when it comes with a mortgage, liability, and repair bills. A month later, Robert and Elaine asked to meet again. I almost refused. Then I realized I wanted one thing: not reconciliation, but clarity. We met in a coffee shop near the courthouse, neutral ground. My mother cried before she sat down. My father looked wrecked. There were no excuses this time, only the thin, stunned grief of people finally staring at what their favoritism had cost. "We thought you'd understand," my mother whispered. "That's the problem," I said. "You always thought I would understand being treated as less." My father tried to say they loved us both. I stopped him. Love without respect is just control wearing softer clothes. Neither of them had an answer to that. They asked whether we could rebuild. I told them the truth. Maybe one day, in small ways, if they learned boundaries and lived them. But they would never again have a key to my home, access to my accounts, or automatic entry to my life. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not restore entitlement. The deeper revenge wasn't that Vanessa lost the house. It wasn't even that her marriage cracked, her image shattered, or my parents had to sell property to pay for the damage. The deeper revenge was this: I was no longer available for the role they wrote for me. I was not the dependable extra in Vanessa's spotlight. I was not the daughter whose competence could be harvested without acknowledgement. I was not the emotional landfill where everyone dumped the cost of keeping the golden child glittering. I took back the house, yes. But more importantly, I took back authorship. I rebuilt the study, restored the trim, rehung the mirror, put a long oak table in the dining room, and invited people who had never once asked me to disappear for someone else's comfort. Tessa laughed when she saw the finished place and said, "Now it actually looks like it belongs to a woman with standards." She was right. So what's the lesson in all of this? It's not "family always comes first." That line has protected a lot of bad behavior. The real lesson is that family is not a lifelong permit to trespass. Not on your home, your finances, your identity, or your peace. Being related to someone does not give them the right to rewrite your labor as their rescue plan, and being the strong one does not mean you were born to absorb injustice quietly. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is let consequences arrive unsoftened. Sometimes justice looks like a court order, a locksmith, and a silence that no one in your family can manipulate anymore. If you are the child who is told to be mature, understanding, generous, patient, and low maintenance while someone else was endlessly excused, hear me clearly. Your boundaries are not cruelty. Your records are not pettiness. Your refusal to be used is not bitterness. It is self-respect. And if you've ever been pushed aside so the favorite could keep winning, tell me in the comments, what would have been your breaking point? The key? The lie? Or the party they threw in a house that was never theirs? Thank you for listening. What stands out to me most in this story is that the deepest betrayal was never just about the house. It was about years of disrespect being treated as normal. Diana's victory feels satisfying because she didn't win through cruelty. She won through courage, truth, and boundaries. That makes the story more powerful than ordinary revenge. It shows that protecting your peace is not selfish, and family should never be an excuse for injustice. What would hurt you more? The fact that they took the house, or the fact that they acted like your pain didn't matter at all? I'm Nora Bennett, 28, and at Thanksgiving dinner my mother handed out gifts like she was dealing cards in a game everyone else had been invited to play. A velvet box went to my sister. A new watch went to my father. My aunt got a spa voucher. My cousin got concert tickets. Even my mother's neighbor's kid, who had only stopped by to drop off pie, walked out with a gift bag and a grin. Then my mother looked right past me, reached for the gravy, and said, like she was commenting on the weather, "Oh, please, be grateful you can sit here." My aunt laughed before anyone else did and added, "Be glad we still remember your name." That broke the room open. Forks paused. Shoulders shook. Someone actually slapped the table. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just folded my napkin, looked around that table like I was seeing it clearly for the first time, and said, "Oh, good to know." That should have been the end of the humiliation. It wasn't. Because what people don't understand is that moments like that never start on the holiday, they explode. They start years earlier, in smaller rooms, in smaller insults, in 100 little decisions that teach one person in a family they are useful, but never precious. And 1 week after that dinner, 7 days, almost to the hour, the same people who laughed were on my Philadelphia doorstep pounding hard enough to rattle the glass, yelling that they needed me to open up right now. Not because they suddenly found their conscience, not because they missed me, because something had already started falling apart, and for the first time in my life, I let it. Before I tell you why they came, and what exactly they wanted from me, tell me what time it is where you are, and where you're watching from. I always wonder how far stories like this travel. My mother's name is Linda Bennett. My father is Mark. My younger sister is Paige. And the aunt who laughed first that night is Denise Mercer, my mother's older sister, the woman who has spent 20 years turning cruelty into family humor and acting offended whenever anyone calls it what it is. If Thanksgiving had been a one-off, maybe I could have swallowed it. But that dinner didn't hurt because of the missing gift. It hurt because it made something public that had always been private. In my family, I was never the daughter who got celebrated. I was the daughter who got assigned. Paige got praise. I got errands. Paige got, "You deserve this." I got, "You're so capable." When I was 16 and won a statewide design scholarship, my mother missed the ceremony because Paige had a choir solo. When I was 22 and landed my first major lighting project restoring a historic theater lobby, my father congratulated me by asking whether I could also take a quick look at the lighting plan for the family's annual charity house tour. "You're better at this sort of thing than we are," he said. That became a pattern. Every December, my mother and Aunt Denise ran the Bennett Mercer Holiday House Tour and Winter Scholarship Auction in our hometown outside Philadelphia, a glossy event people in town loved to call a family tradition. What they never said out loud was that I was the one who made it look polished. I built the donor website. I drafted the sponsor packets. I lit the showcase homes. I designed the event graphics. I stayed up fixing payment links while my mother took photos in a red coat and posted captions about family, generosity, and grace. Thanksgiving was the first time they forgot to pretend I mattered while I was standing in the room. 2 days later, I saw my mother's Facebook post. A perfect photo of the table, all warm candlelight and smiling faces, captioned, "Nothing matters more than having my children home." I wasn't in the frame, not cropped out by accident, gone. Then I saw something else. My cousin had uploaded a short story that night from the far end of the table. The clip was only 12 seconds long, shaky and half obscured by a wine glass, but the audio was clean. My mother saying, "Be grateful you can sit here." My aunt laughing. Me answering, "Oh, good to know." She deleted it by morning. Too late. I had already saved it. I sat in my apartment with my laptop open and finally asked myself the question I should have asked years earlier. Was I actually loved? Or was I just the easiest person to use? And once that question lodged in my chest, everything else became clear. I called my best friend, Tessa Hall, and for the first time, I didn't defend my family. I told the whole truth. She went quiet for a second and then said, "Nora, they don't panic when they hurt you. They panic when they lose access to you. There's a difference." That sentence changed the week. Because I didn't make some impulsive, dramatic decision in a coffee shop. I made a deliberate one. I opened every folder connected to the holiday fundraiser. I checked what belonged to me, what had my name on it, what payment systems were linked to my business accounts, and what legal permissions I had given over the years without thinking. Then I drafted one calm, professional email. Effective immediately, I was withdrawing from all planning, design, vendor coordination, web administration, and donor communications related to the Bennett Mercer Holiday House Tour and Winter Scholarship Auction. Any future use of my work, business accounts, images, lighting plans, or name was unauthorized. I copied the committee chair, the printer, the florist, the venue manager, and the bank processor. Then I blocked my family group chat, turned off my phone, and decided something else at the same time. I would not be coming back for Christmas. Have you ever spent years trying to earn tenderness from people who only ever rewarded your usefulness? Because once you see that pattern, it's almost impossible to unsee. The first person to respond wasn't my mother. It was Paige. Of course it was Paige, because Paige had been trained all her life to be the soft face of whatever my mother wanted. Her text came 8 minutes after my email went out. "Nora, what are you doing? Mom says you're overreacting and embarrassing everyone." I stared at that word, embarrassing, because that was always the family rule, wasn't it? Their cruelty was private, my reaction was public. I wrote back, "No, I'm refusing to keep my work under people who don't respect me." She sent 3 dots, then nothing. A half hour later, the florist emailed me saying she could no longer process invoices without an authorized replacement because the last 4 years of event billing had been routed through the design management portal attached to my company. The printer wrote next, then the house tour coordinator, then the scholarship treasurer. Every message said some version of the same thing. They had assumed I was leading operations because my name was on the planning deck, the donor portal, and the sponsor packet. That's when I realized just how long my family had been using my credibility as part of their brand. My mother hadn't just leaned on me behind the scenes. She had built public trust on top of my labor and let people assume I endorsed everything. Tessa came over that evening with Thai takeout and a legal pad, because that's the kind of friend she is. The kind who brings food and asks practical questions when your life is cracking open. She works in municipal records and sees enough nonprofit paperwork to know when something smells off. We sat cross-legged on my living room rug going line by line through old event files, reimbursement summaries, vendor quotes, archived invoices. The longer we looked, the uglier it got. My Aunt Denise had submitted duplicate reimbursements the year before for the same floral installation under two different budget categories. My mother had used donor hospitality funds for things that definitely were not donor hospitality: salon services, boutique clothing, a hotel stay the weekend after the event. And because most of the digital records passed through my systems first, copies had landed in folders linked to my email. Not because I was spying, because I was the one doing the actual work. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the discovery that my mother had been presenting one of my lighting concepts, something I'd built for a restored carriage house display, as Denise's creative idea in sponsor meetings. I found the deck. I found the notes. I found Denise's little comment in the margin on one exported PDF. Don't mention Nora unless they ask. Keep it simpler. Keep it simpler. That's a nice phrase for erasing a person while still billing people off her talent. The next morning, I did one more thing. I emailed the committee chair directly, a woman named Eleanor Pike, and told her with complete professionalism that I was stepping away and needed my name removed from any fundraising materials immediately. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I attached a list of the assets I controlled and a transition note. Eleanor responded in 12 minutes. I'm surprised. Linda said your role this year was minimal. Minimal. I actually laughed out loud. Then the phone calls started. First my mother, then my father, then Paige, then two family friends who had no business contacting me at all. By evening, my Aunt Denise left a voicemail that said, "You need to stop this stunt before people get the wrong idea." I played that message twice. The wrong idea. Not the truth. The wrong idea. So I did what I had never done before. I stopped cushioning them from consequences. I didn't return the calls. I revoked my business payment credentials from the event site. I moved the archived design files off the shared drive. I notified the web host that the family was no longer authorized to use my commercial templates. Then I sent one final message to the family group chat before muting it completely. Since I should be grateful just to sit at the table, I assume you won't need the daughter whose labor built your event. Please direct all future questions to someone you actually value. No profanity, no melodrama, just truth. And truth, it turns out, is a lot louder than people expect when they've spent years depending on your silence. By Monday, concern had become panic. My mother texted 6 times before 9 a.m. The first message said, "Call me, this has gone too far." The second said, "People are asking questions." The third said, "Why are you punishing the whole family over a holiday misunderstanding?" That word again? Misunderstanding. As if I had somehow misheard a room full of laughter. By noon, I knew the real problem wasn't that I had gone quiet. It was that the event was wobbling in public. The donor page had been temporarily disabled because the payment processor on file no longer matched the authorized manager. A sponsor wanted clarification on who was overseeing production. Someone on the committee had noticed that the printed materials listed me as Lead Design and Operations Coordinator, while Linda had recently told people I was barely involved this year. Contradictions have a way of making polite people suddenly become very curious. Then my father, Mark, video called me. Against my better judgment, I answered. He wasn't at home. He was standing inside one of the tour properties, a decorated colonial house with ladders in the background and half-hung garland behind him. His face looked tired, but not sorry. "Nora," he said, like he was trying to sound gentle and reasonable. "Your mother is beside herself. We need to sort this out quietly." Quietly. There it was again. Not rightly. Quietly. I asked him one question. "Has anyone apologized to me for Thanksgiving?" He blinked. Behind him, I could hear my Aunt Denise's voice snapping at someone about centerpieces. My father lowered his eyes and said, "That's not the point right now." I almost admired the honesty of that answer. It wasn't the point right now. Their fundraiser was the point. Their reputation was the point. Their image was the point. I said, "Then I'm not the point either. Not to any of you." He started to argue, but I ended the call. That evening, the saved Thanksgiving clip spread without me lifting a finger. I didn't post it. I didn't send it. But small towns have a funny way of turning deleted things into circulating things, especially when the people in them spend all year marketing themselves as warm, generous, faith-driven pillars of the community. By Tuesday, Tessa texted me screenshots from local Facebook comments under my mother's event promo. "Didn't someone say Linda excluded her own daughter at Thanksgiving? Is the family having some issue? Who runs the scholarship money?" My mother responded the way she always did when control slipped. She began telling relatives I was stressed, exhausted, not myself, going through something. It was such a familiar tactic, I almost felt embarrassed for ever having fallen for it. You don't have to call a woman crazy outright if you can just suggest she's emotional enough that no one should trust her version. Paige texted me late that night. "Mom's crying all day. Aunt Denise says you're trying to destroy the family." I typed back, "No. I'm refusing to keep holding it together for people who only notice me when something breaks." She didn't respond for hours. Then finally, "I didn't know your name was on all of it." That message sat with me, because Paige had benefited from the same system, but maybe she hadn't understood the machinery underneath it. Maybe she'd never had to. The next morning, my mother left me a voicemail that cracked something open, not because it was sad, but because it was so revealing. She said, "You have no idea how humiliating this is for me. Not how painful, not how wrong. Humiliating." That's when I knew exactly what would happen next. They weren't going to reflect. They were going to mobilize. Because in families like mine, shame doesn't lead to accountability first. It leads to a siege. And I remember sitting on the edge of my bed thinking, when they come, what they'll really be asking is not, "Why are you hurt?" It'll be, "How dare you stop absorbing the damage?" So tell me this, when people say they miss you, do they miss you, or do they miss the role you played in keeping their life comfortable? They came the following Saturday, just after noon, in the kind of cold that makes every knock sound sharper. I was at home in thick socks, halfway through reorganizing a supply cabinet, when the pounding started. Hard, fast, not neighborly, not a doorbell, a demand. Then came my mother's voice through the wood. "Nora, open the door right now." My stomach dropped, but not from fear, from recognition. I knew before I reached the entryway that they hadn't driven 90 minutes to Philadelphia because they suddenly understood what they'd done. I looked through the peephole and saw all four of them crowded on my stoop. Linda in a camel coat with her lipstick already worn off around the edges, Mark holding a banker's box full of papers, Paige tense and pale, and Denise standing slightly back with her jaw set like this was all somehow my fault. My aunt hit the door with the flat of her hand and shouted, "This has gone far enough." I opened it with the chain still on. "You need to leave," I said. My mother's face crumpled instantly into something theatrical and urgent. "We need to talk. Please open up." Mark lifted the banker's box a little as if that explained everything. Denise cut in before I could answer. "The committee froze reimbursement approvals. Eleanor thinks there are discrepancies. We just need to clear this up." There it was. Not, "We're sorry." Not, "We were wrong." We just need to clear this up. I looked at the box and understood. They needed signatures, explanations, endorsements, maybe even a scapegoat. My mother lowered her voice. "Please, Nora, not out here." That almost made me laugh. Public humiliation only mattered when it was theirs. I unlatched the chain and let them into the narrow foyer of my row house, but I didn't invite them to sit like guests. I stayed standing. They filled the room with cold air, expensive perfume, and the old assumption that I would eventually do what was needed to restore the family to comfort. Denise was the first to speak once the door shut. This ridiculous boundary act has already damaged the auction. Donors are nervous, the committee is suspicious, and people are gossiping because of that stupid clip. I folded my arms. Interesting that you call my boundary the problem and not what was actually said. My mother stepped toward me. I was joking. No, I said. You were telling the truth in public. Paige flinched. My father set the box on the console table and opened it. Inside were printed budgets, reimbursement forms, vendor contracts, and a stack of sponsor letters. We just need you to explain that you were still overseeing transition, he said carefully, and that those expense issues are administrative errors. Eleanor trusts you. That sentence landed exactly where it was meant to. Eleanor trusts you, not us. You. There was the whole family system in one line. They had finally come to my door not because they had found their hearts, but because they had run out of clean hands to borrow. My mother tried again. Softer this time, tears gathering right on cue. Please don't do this to us right before Christmas. I looked at all of them, really looked, and felt something settle in me with surprising calm. For years, I had mistaken the moment before confrontation for weakness, because my body would shake. But sometimes your body shakes because it knows a door is finally closing behind you. I said, you didn't come here to talk about Thanksgiving. You came here because your event is collapsing and you want me to crawl back under it and hold up the floor. Denise snapped, for God's sake, stop being dramatic. I answered, no. You stop pretending this is love. And that was the moment the room changed, because all at once they understood I was not going to make this easy, private, or cost-free for them anymore. My mother sat down without being asked, one hand pressed to her chest like she was the injured one. My father stayed standing near the paperwork. Paige hovered by the doorway between the hall and the living room. Denise didn't sit at all. She paced, which is what people do when they know the facts aren't on their side and hope movement will look like confidence. Mark slid 3 forms toward me. If you sign these, he said, we can verify vendor approvals and release the hold. Then we can deal with the family stuff separately. I stared at him for a long second. That was the line, wasn't it? Fix the public mess first. Feel your feelings later. I pushed the papers back untouched. No. My mother's voice sharpened immediately. Nora, you are not blowing up a scholarship fund because you're upset over a joke. I met her eyes. I'm not blowing anything up. I stepped away from something built on lies. Denise gave a harsh laugh. Lies? Don't flatter yourself. You were helping the family like everyone else. I turned to her. Should I start with the duplicate floral reimbursements from last year? Or the donor hospitality charge that paid for your hotel and spa weekend? The room went dead still. Paige looked at Denise so fast I heard her earring click against her coat collar. My aunt's face actually lost color. My father muttered, Nora. But I wasn't done. I went to my desk, pulled out a folder and laid copies on the coffee table. I have the invoices. I have the payment logs. I have the export trail from the admin system attached to my business email. I also have the sponsor deck where one of my designs was presented as Denise's concept, with a note saying, not to mention me unless someone asked. My mother stood up then, furious. You went digging through family records? No, I said evenly. I worked. That's how I found them. That's the part all of you keep forgetting. I'm the one who actually did the work. Paige took a step toward the table, reading the top page with her lips parted. Mom, she said quietly. My mother didn't look at her. Denise recovered first, the way bullies do when cornered. They try contempt. Everyone shifts expenses. That's how events work. Not charitable scholarship events, I said, and not under my name. My father rubbed his forehead. Nothing criminal happened. I looked at him and said the thing I had been holding since the video call. You knew. His silence answered before his mouth did. My mother snapped. Mark only knew there were some messy reimbursements. Paige looked from one parent to the other, stunned. You told me Nora had barely anything to do with this year's event. My mother finally looked at her, and in that look, I saw the whole structure of our family. Lies arranged by convenience, defended by whoever benefited most. Denise pointed a finger at me. You're trying to ruin your own mother over paperwork. I laughed once, without humor. No, I'm refusing to save a woman who laughed when I was humiliated, and then kept using my name to make herself look respectable. My mother's eyes filled, but now the tears looked less polished and more furious. After everything I did for you, that sentence, I cut in, is exactly why we're here. Everything with you is debt. Meals are debt. Help is debt. Love is debt. And whenever I ask for basic respect, you send me the bill. Denise tried one last angle, the ugliest and truest. People donate because this looks like a good family, because your mother is warm and Paige is charming, and you, she jabbed a finger toward me, you look serious and competent. You make people trust us. We needed you to act like part of the family. Paige sucked in a breath. My mother snapped, Denise! But it was too late. There it was, stripped bare. Not daughter, asset, optics, credibility. I felt strangely calm. Thank you, I said. That's the most honest thing anyone in this family has said to me in years. I told them then what I had done before they arrived. I had already sent Eleanor Pike a formal note resigning from all involvement. I had also forwarded enough documentation to justify an independent review of the event accounts, specifically to protect myself from liability. I did not accuse anyone of crimes. I simply documented irregularities and withdrew consent for further use of my work and name. My mother stared at me like she'd never seen me before. How could you do that to your own family? She whispered. I answered, how could all of you build this on my back and still laugh when I was handed nothing at your table? My father finally sank onto the edge of the chair near the console and said, very quietly, I should have stopped this years ago. It might have moved me if it hadn't come after the paperwork failed. Paige started crying then, not loud, not dramatic, just the stunned cry of somebody realizing the family story she lived inside wasn't true. She looked at me and said, I didn't know. I believe that part. But innocence and benefit are not the same thing. I told her, you didn't ask. Then I opened my front door and said the sentence I had practiced in my head all week without knowing it. You don't get to call it love when what you really mean is access. Take your papers and go. My mother didn't move at first. Denise did, muttering that I was vindictive. My father gathered the forms with shaking hands. Paige was the last one out. At the threshold, she looked back like she wanted me to tell her this could still be fixed before Christmas. I didn't. Some things should not be fixed quickly. Some things should finally be allowed to break. The fallout was faster than any of them expected, and that was the part people from good families never understand. Once image is all that has been holding things together, truth doesn't have to scream to do damage. It just has to stand there. Eleanor Pike did exactly what competent people do when someone withdraws under liability concerns. She paused the event, brought in an outside accountant, and notified the board that all scholarship-related expenses would be reviewed before another dollar moved. Within 10 days, the Bennett Mercer Holiday House Tour was officially postponed. By the second week of December, postponed became restructured under independent oversight, which was polite community language for Linda and Denise had lost control. My Aunt Denise resigned from the Women's Civic Board before she could be removed, then quietly repaid a chunk of expenses after the review flagged reimbursements she couldn't justify. My mother was asked to step down as public chair of the scholarship committee, while procedures were updated, which sounded graceful enough on paper but landed exactly the way it should in town. The Christmas card photo never happened that year. Half the relatives didn't want to be in the same room, and the other half were suddenly too busy pretending they had always thought Linda could be a bit much. My father called me twice and left voicemails that were, for once, about me and not a task. He admitted he had let my mother and Denise use me because it was easier than confronting them, and because somewhere along the line, he had started confusing peace with silence. I didn't call back right away. Apologies that arrive only after public collapse are not worthless, but they are not enough on their own either. Paige asked to meet me for coffee a few days before Christmas. I almost said no. Then I remembered that unlike the others, she had at least looked shocked by the truth instead of offended by it. So I met her at a little bakery in Old City. She came without makeup, without excuses, and without the Bennett family script. She told me she had spent her whole life assuming our mother's version of us was reality, that I was independent, hard to read, fine, that she was the one who needed extra attention, that the family event was Mom's thing with a little help from me. She said, "I thought favoritism looked like being loved more. I didn't realize it also looked like making you carry things I never had to notice." That was the first apology in the whole mess that didn't sound like self-defense. I told her I wasn't ready to rebuild a sister relationship overnight. She nodded and said, "I know. I just didn't want to leave you with nothing but their version of me, too." That mattered. Sometimes healing isn't a grand reunion. Sometimes it's one person deciding to stop lying because the lie benefits them. By New Year's, I had turned down every request to just come talk as a family. There was no final movie scene reconciliation in a softly lit living room, no group hug, no miracle roast dinner where everyone suddenly became emotionally literate. What happened instead was smaller, slower, and more honest. I spent Christmas in Philadelphia with Tessa and 3 friends from work, eating lasagna off mismatched plates and laughing so hard at midnight that my face hurt. A board member from the scholarship committee, someone who had seen my transition notes and the way I handled the mess without public theatrics, recommended me for a major winter installation project at a restored opera house. I got the contract in January. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that treated me like I should be grateful for a chair at their table ended up losing a whole local empire of holiday prestige because they couldn't manage one simple thing: basic respect. Months later, my mother mailed me a handwritten letter. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A real letter. She said loneliness had forced her to confront what applause had been doing for her for years. She admitted she had loved being admired more than she had loved being honest. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She said she understood if I never trusted her the same way again. That was the first thing she had ever written to me that didn't try to buy a quick ending. I still haven't decided what role, if any, she will have in my life. Boundaries are not revenge fantasies. They are maintenance for self-respect. But I won't lie. The consequences were satisfying. Denise lost the board seat she bragged about for a decade. My mother lost the flawless holiday image she had built at my expense. My father lost the illusion that staying quiet made him kind. And Paige lost the comfort of not knowing, which may have been the beginning of her becoming a better person. As for me, I lost something too. The last hope that if I worked hard enough, I could earn tenderness from people committed to misunderstanding me. And that loss, strangely enough, gave me my life back. So here's the lesson I took from all of it. Being the dependable one in a broken family can feel noble, but if your love is only welcomed when it comes with labor, you are not being cherished. You are being managed. The moment I stopped confusing access with affection, everything changed. So tell me honestly, if your own family humiliated you in public and only came running when they needed your name, your work, or your credibility, would you open the door? Our team is always working hard to create meaningful, engaging stories that resonate with viewers. We are committed to sharing fictional stories designed to deliver valuable lessons, inspiring messages, and educational content in a thoughtful and positive way. This script carries an important educational message about self-respect, emotional awareness, and the importance of healthy boundaries. It reminds viewers that true love and family support should never come with humiliation, and that personal growth often begins when we choose dignity, wisdom, and honesty.